In the heart of a quiet village where the scent of freshly cut hay mingled with the whispers of prayer, destiny wove a dangerous thread between two forbidden souls. She was Sister Isabella, a young nun bound by sacred vows and silent suffering, a woman who had traded freedom for faith. He was Luca, a humble farmer whose hands knew the soil better than sin until he looked into her eyes. Their first meeting was nothing but an accident, a wounded bird, a shared kindness. Yet it awakened something the church could never bless. Between the convent bells and the creaking barns, a secret began to bloom. Every glance became a confession, every touch a prayer unspoken. But love, in a world ruled by fear and faith, is never without punishment. When passion defied the heavens, the village turned cruel, the church unforgiving. Their story was whispered in the fields, painted in the gold of dying sunlight, the tale of a nun who dared to love and a man who dared to believe in her. This is the tragedy of hearts bound by faith and broken by the laws of heaven. The forbidden vow. The sun hung low over the golden fields of Lombardy, casting long shadows over the thatched roofs of the village. It was a place untouched by time, where the rhythm of life was measured by the ringing of church bells and the creaking of wagon wheels. The villagers lived simply, their hands hardened by work, their hearts guided by faith. But beneath that faith, whispers always lingered, whispers of sins, secrets, and forbidden longings buried deep beneath the soil. On one such afternoon, a small carriage arrived at the edge of the village, its wheels stirring the dust of the narrow road. Inside sat Sister Isabella, a young woman draped in the white and gray of the convent. Her face, pale and serene, was hidden beneath her veil, yet her eyes, when she dared to lift them, shimmered with quiet sorrow. She had not chosen this path. It had been chosen for her. Once she had been the daughter of a nobleman, destined for a different life, until tragedy and betrayal led her into the arms of the church. Now she was being sent to the convent of Santa Lucia, a place known less for its holiness and more for its silence. The convent itself stood on the outskirts, its stone walls cold and watchful against the endless stretch of wheat and rye. Nearby, a cluster of barns and farmlands belonged to Luca, a farmer whose land provided food for both the village and the sisters. He was a man of simple speech but deep thought, one who worked from dawn till dusk, his life tied to the land like the roots of his crops. People said he was kind but distant, still mourning the wife he lost years ago. That evening, as Isabella stepped through the convent's wooden gate, she felt an invisible weight press upon her heart. The Mother Superior, a stern woman with eyes like winter frost, greeted her without a smile. "You are here to serve, Sister Isabella," she said coldly, "to cleanse your soul through silence and obedience. Remember, the world outside these walls no longer exists for you." Isabella nodded, her voice trapped behind her lips. The heavy doors closed behind her, sealing her away from the life she once knew. Days turned into weeks. Her duties were simple yet endless, scrubbing floors, tending to the garden, and praying before the altar until her knees ached. But sometimes, when the dawn broke and the convent bells still slept, she would slip outside to the courtyard to breathe in the air of the fields. It was there one morning that she first saw Luca. He was standing by his wagon, unloading sacks of grain. The light caught the sweat on his brow, and though he looked weary, there was a calm strength in him, the kind that comes from years of quiet endurance. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and Isabella quickly turned away, ashamed of the warmth that crept into her chest. She had promised to belong only to God. Yet, that one look lingered like the echo of a prayer she could not forget. As days passed, their paths crossed again, small, innocent moments that fate seemed to arrange. Once he handed her a basket of wheat. Another time he found her near the barn tending to an injured bird. "You've a gentle heart, sister," Luca said softly. She hesitated before replying. Even the smallest creatures deserve mercy. Her voice was delicate, like wind through leaves, and for a moment, he forgot the silence that usually filled his days. That night, Isabella lay awake, staring at the flickering candle beside her bed. The world she had left behind, laughter, music, touch, came rushing back in waves of guilt and longing. She clasped her rosary tightly, whispering prayers to drown the beating of her heart. But prayers cannot silence the human soul forever. Outside, the wind carried the scent of harvest, the same air that touched Luca's hands as he worked through the night. The village remained unaware that something fragile and forbidden had begun to stir between the walls of faith and the fields of freedom. But the earth remembers every secret it buries, and soon, the soil that fed their bodies would become witness to the hunger of their hearts. For now, the story of Isabella and Luca was nothing more than a spark, small, hidden, and trembling in the dark. Yet in that single moment of eye contact, the first thread of destiny had been pulled, and from that thread would unravel a tale of love so pure and dangerous, it would challenge both heaven and hell. The field stood silent, golden and still, waiting for the storm to come. The days that followed were marked by the slow rhythm of prayer and labor. For Sister Isabella, time had always moved in circles. Morning bells, chores, silence, evening hymns, and sleep. Yet ever since she met Luca, that circle had broken. Each day now carried a quiet anticipation she could neither name nor deny, somewhere between the hymns and the harvest. Her heart had begun to beat differently. One morning, as dawn light spilled across the courtyard, Isabella went out to fetch herbs for the convent's infirmary. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of hay. She carried her small basket and walked past the wooden fence that bordered the convent grounds. Beyond it stretched Luca's farmland, acres of gold, touched by the first warmth of the sun. She paused, watching him work. He was repairing the wheel of his wagon, his hands rough and steady, his shirt damp from sweat. It was a simple sight, but to Isabella, it held a strange kind of grace. Something deeply human, something forbidden. Luca noticed her standing there, her pale figure framed by morning light. He wiped his hands and offered a gentle nod. "Good morning, sister," he said softly. "The fields are kind to us today." Isabella hesitated before replying. "God blesses those who labor with honest hearts." Her tone was calm, but her pulse betrayed her. She turned to leave, but Luca smiled. "Would you bless my hands then?" They could use the grace. His words carried no mockery, only warmth. Yet Isabella felt her breath catch. No man had ever spoken to her so directly since she had taken her vows. She looked down, clutching the rosary hidden beneath her sleeve. "Grace does not come from me," she murmured. "It belongs to God." "Then maybe," he said with quiet sincerity, "He sends it through kind souls like yours." For days after, those words lingered in her mind like a hymn that refused to fade. Their encounters became more frequent, sometimes by chance, sometimes by silent intent. When she fetched water from the well, Luca would be nearby, carrying grain. When the convent needed firewood, he would bring it himself rather than send a worker. Each meeting was brief, a few words, a passing glance, yet they carried the weight of something unspoken. One afternoon, a summer storm gathered over the valley. The sky turned heavy with clouds, and the wind rustled the fields like restless spirits. Isabella was sent to collect laundry from the line behind the chapel. As the rain began to fall, she hurried to shelter under the barn's wooden arch. The scent of hay filled the air, warm, earthy, alive. It was there she saw Luca again, stacking tools before the storm worsened. "You'll catch your death in this rain," he said, moving toward her with concern. "I'm fine," she replied, though her soaked garments clung to her like a second skin. He took his cloak and draped it over her shoulders without a word. For a moment their hands brushed, and the world seemed to still. The thunder outside faded. All that existed was the fragile space between them. "Why are you kind to me, Luca?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. He looked at her, not as a nun, not as something sacred, but as a woman. "Because you remind me that even faith has a heartbeat," he said. Those words pierced through every wall she had built within herself. In that moment, Isabella felt the weight of her vows pressed down like chains. She stepped back, clutching the cloak around her as though it were both protection and sin. "You mustn't speak to me like that," she whispered. "It's not right." "I know," Luca replied softly. "And yet, here I am, saying it." The storm outside broke into a torrent of rain, masking the sound of her tears. She wanted to run, to hide, to pray, but something in her refused to turn away. His presence, his warmth, his quiet strength, they awakened a longing she thought she had buried forever. When the rain finally eased, she returned to the convent in silence. That night she knelt before the altar longer than ever before. "Forgive me, Father," she whispered, "for I feel what I should not feel." For I look upon the world you made and find beauty where I should see temptation. But the heart, once awakened, cannot be silenced by prayer alone. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Luca, his eyes filled not with desire, but understanding. And in that understanding she found both comfort and danger. Outside, the rain had washed the fields clean, but inside Isabella's soul, a storm had just begun, one that neither confession nor faith could calm. The summer deepened, and with it, the distance between duty and desire grew harder to walk. Sister Isabella carried her prayers like stones, yet even in her silence she felt the echo of Luca's voice in her heart. Each dawn when she looked out over the fields, she saw him, his figure framed by golden light, strong and real, untouched by the cold weight of vows. She told herself she watched only to thank God for his creation. But deep within, she knew it was no longer God she sought. The first sign of change came quietly. One evening, Isabella was asked to deliver herbs and medicine to a sick child who lived beyond the convent walls. The path led her through the fields, and as fate would have it, the sky broke open into sudden rain. The road turned to mud, her shoes sank, and the basket slipped from her hands. She stumbled, and there he was, Isabella! Luca ran from his barn, his voice sharp with worry. He lifted her before she could fall, his arms firm around her trembling body. For a long second, she couldn't breathe. The rain poured over them, soaking his hair, her veil, the earth beneath their feet. Yet she felt nothing but the warmth of his hands. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though she made no move to pull away. "I could say the same to you," he replied, brushing wet strands from her face. "You'll catch your death in this storm." Lightning split the sky, followed by a deep roll of thunder. Without another word, Luca took her hand and led her to the barn nearby, the same one where they had met before. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of hay and rain. The doors shuddered with wind, and for the first time there were no prayers, no bells, no eyes to watch. She stood before him, her heart beating louder than the storm. "We cannot," she said. "We must not." "I know," he answered, stepping closer. "But knowing doesn't make it easier." Their eyes met. A silent confession neither could voice. All the walls she had built, the vows she had sworn, began to crumble under the weight of that gaze. Luca's hand reached out, trembling slightly, brushing the edge of her sleeve. It was the smallest of touches, yet it felt like crossing into eternity. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. She closed her eyes. "I can't." Then, without thought or reason, she moved toward him. The space between them vanished. His lips met hers, hesitant at first, then certain, desperate, alive. The world outside dissolved into rain and thunder. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. The hay rustled softly beneath their feet, the air heavy with confession and sin. When they finally pulled apart, tears mixed with the rain on Isabella's cheeks. "What have we done?" she whispered, trembling. "Something true," Luca said, his voice rough with emotion. "Something that no sin can undo." But she shook her head, stepping back, her breath unsteady. "You don't understand. They'll call it blasphemy. They'll burn me for this." "Then let them," he said fiercely. "Let the world call it sin. I call it love." She looked at him, torn between fear and longing. His words were madness, yet they held a kind of holiness her prayers never had. For the first time she felt seen, not as a sister of faith, not as a sinner, but as a woman, whole and alive. When the rain finally stopped, she knew she had to return. Luca walked her to the edge of the field. The village was silent, wrapped in mist. "Promise me," he said quietly, "that this moment won't be our last." She hesitated. "I cannot promise what heaven forbids," he smiled sadly. "Then let heaven forgive us both." That night, Isabella knelt before the crucifix in her cell, her body still trembling from what she had done. Her tears fell onto the cold stone floor, each one a plea for mercy. "Forgive me, Father," she whispered, "for I have loved." But deep inside, another voice spoke, gentle, defiant, alive. "Love is not a sin." From that night on, the world around them changed. The air between the fields and the convent grew heavier, the silence more watchful. Whispers began to stir among the villagers, strange sightings, secret meetings. A nun seen beyond the walls after dark, and though she prayed harder than ever, Isabella knew that her prayers were no longer to be absolved, but to be understood. The storm had passed, but in its wake, something far more dangerous had been born. A love that defied God, men, and fate itself. The rains passed, leaving behind a season of uneasy calm. The fields turned green again, yet for Sister Isabella, peace had become an illusion. Each morning she prayed harder, each night she wept longer. But neither her tears nor her prayers could wash away the memory of Luca's touch. Their secret, once tender and hidden, now throbbed like an open wound. She tried to keep her distance. Days went by without a word between them. But love once awakened does not sleep easily. One afternoon, while tending the convent garden, she saw him again, across the fence, his hands busy with a plow, his shirt clinging to his skin beneath the sun. He looked up just once and their eyes met. That single glance, fleeting as it was, reignited the flame they both struggled to smother. By twilight, she found herself drawn to the old barn once more. The same place that had witnessed their sin now stood as their sanctuary. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered when he appeared in the doorway. "And yet you did," he replied gently, "because your heart knows the truth, even if your vows deny it." For a moment, she wanted to believe him, to imagine a world where love was not punished, where faith and desire could coexist. But reality came crashing back. The convent walls had eyes. The village, small and curious, thrived on gossip. And soon, the whispers began. It started with a child who claimed to have seen a nun walking through the fields after sunset. Then, one of the sisters noticed Isabella returning to her quarters late at night, her habit damp and her face pale. The Mother Superior, ever watchful, began to suspect that something unholy stirred beneath her holy roof. "You have been restless, Sister Isabella," she said one evening, her tone sharp as a blade. "Your prayers lack devotion. Your eyes wander too often toward the world outside." "I am merely tired, Mother," Isabella replied, keeping her gaze lowered. "Or tempted." The older woman's voice hardened. "Confess now before temptation becomes damnation." But Isabella said nothing. Silence was her last shield, and her slow destruction. Days later, during Mass, the Mother Superior's suspicions deepened. Isabella's voice trembled during hymns. Her hands shook when holding the chalice. It was enough. One morning, guards from the Church Inquisition arrived in the village. Men in black robes, cold-faced and merciless. They carried orders to investigate a breach of purity within Santa Lucia's walls. The news spread quickly. Villagers gathered in groups, whispering, pointing fingers. Many pitied the young nun. Others smirked, eager for scandal. Luca heard it all from a passing merchant. His heart clenched with dread. He knew it was only a matter of time before the truth reached them both. That night he came to the convent garden, hidden beneath the shadows of the trees. Isabella was there, waiting. The moonlight revealed the anguish in her face. "They know," she said, her voice breaking. "They'll question me tomorrow." "Then tell them nothing," Luca urged. "Say I forced you. Let them condemn me instead." She shook her head fiercely. "No, you've already lost enough for my sake. I won't let them destroy you too." "Isabella, please." She placed a trembling hand over his lips. "If love has meaning, then let it end with mercy." Their goodbye was silent, their tears the only witnesses. As dawn approached, Isabella returned to her cell, her heart heavy yet resolved. When the inquisitors came, she faced them without fear. "Have you broken your vows?" the lead priest demanded. "Yes," she said softly. "With whom?" "With a man who taught me that love is not the enemy of God." Gasps filled the chapel. The Mother Superior's face turned ashen. The priest's expression twisted in disgust. "You blaspheme," he spat. "You have turned your back on heaven." "If heaven cannot forgive love," she replied, her voice trembling yet clear, "then perhaps heaven does not understand humanity." Her words sealed her fate. The verdict came swiftly: confinement, removal of her vows, and eternal isolation. The Church stripped her of her title and her dignity. Meanwhile, Luca was hunted as the corrupter, the heretic, the man who defiled a servant of God. He fled into the countryside, living among shadows, his heart burdened by the knowledge that she had taken the blame to save him. The barn where they once met was burned, the haystack turned to ash, as if the village itself wished to erase their sin from the earth. But even ashes hold memories. Those who passed the ruins at dusk claimed to hear soft weeping carried on the wind. And sometimes, the faint echo of a prayer that was half love, half lament. The price of desire had been paid, not in fire or punishment, but in the slow agony of two souls torn apart by faith and longing. And yet, somewhere beneath the sorrow, their love still lived, unrepentant, unholy, and eternal. The convent bells rang at dawn, their sound hollow and mournful, echoing across the fields that once knew laughter, whispers, and love. Sister Isabella, no longer a sister in the eyes of the church, was led away from the chapel in chains of silence. Her veil had been torn away, her white habit replaced with coarse gray. She was no longer sister, only Isabella, a sinner condemned to live out her days in isolation. The villagers gathered to watch as the guards escorted her to the stone cell near the edge of the abbey, a place where the condemned prayed, repented, and were forgotten. Faces that once smiled at her now turned away, afraid of guilt by association. Mothers pulled their children close, whispering warnings about what happens to women who listen to the devil. Yet in Isabella's eyes, there was no rebellion, no hatred, only peace. Fragile but real. In the dark of her confinement, she found strange comfort. The small cell was bare, one cross on the wall, a bowl of water, and a single window overlooking the fields. Through that window, she could see the world she once longed for, the endless expanse of wheat swaying in the wind, kissed by the same sun that once touched Luca's skin. At night, she would kneel and pray, not for forgiveness, but for him. "Keep him safe, Lord," she whispered. "Let him live free, even if I cannot." And though she was alone, she often thought she could hear footsteps beyond the walls, faint and familiar. She knew in her heart that Luca was out there, watching from afar, unable to let go. Months passed. Seasons changed. The villagers forgot, as they always do. But Luca did not. He wandered from farm to farm, taking shelter wherever he could, until one night, driven by longing and guilt, he returned to the outskirts of the convent. Under the cover of darkness, he made his way to the narrow window of her cell. "Isabella," he whispered. The faintest rustle answered him. Then her face appeared in the moonlight, pale, thin, but still beautiful in its quiet sorrow. For a long moment they said nothing. Words had become too small for what they felt. "You shouldn't have come," she finally murmured. "And yet I had to," he said. "I couldn't let the world forget what we were." "The world will never understand us, Luca," she said softly. "But God, perhaps one day he will." He reached through the bars, his fingers brushing hers. Her touch was cold, fragile, like the last petal of a dying flower. "I'd trade 1,000 prayers," he said, "just to hold your hand once more without iron between us." A tear slipped down her cheek, glistening in the pale light. "Then hold it now," she whispered. "Let this moment be our prayer." They stayed like that for what felt like eternity. Two souls divided by faith, united by love. No words, no vows, no forgiveness. Only the simple truth of being seen and loved, even in ruin. When the guards came at dawn, Luca had already gone, vanishing into the mist. But that night became a legend. Some said the nun spoke to an angel. Others said a ghost came to comfort her. No one truly knew, except the fields, which seemed to bloom brighter the next morning, as though touched by a secret blessing. Years passed. Isabella's health faded, her body weakened by hunger and solitude. Yet she never cursed her fate. On her final morning, she gazed out of her window at the golden fields and smiled faintly. "Love is not sin," she whispered. "It is the only truth we ever lived." When the sisters entered her cell, they found her kneeling, her hands folded in peace. A single ray of sunlight fell across her face, warm and gentle. Some said she died praying. Others believed she died remembering. Either way, she was free. Not long after her death, villagers began to speak of strange things. A figure in white walking through the fields at dusk, her veil fluttering like mist, her eyes soft and sorrowful. They said she never spoke, only placed her hands over the wheat as if blessing it. And sometimes beside her, a shadow followed, a man's figure silent and faithful, walking with her until the stars came out. They called her the saint of the fields, the nun who loved beyond sin, who turned scandal into legend and punishment into peace. Her story became a whisper passed through generations, not of shame, but of redemption. For in the end, love had not been her fall. It had been her salvation, and in the golden stillness of the harvest, if one listens closely, the wind still carries her final prayer, soft, eternal, and free. Love cannot be forbidden, for it is the language of God Himself.